I'm going to get moving on the agenda here. Dr. Snoop, if you would, please.
Commissioners. So we'll begin here back from the break. So the Bureau of Wildlife Management would like to thank the Department of Environmental Protection's West Nile Virus Surveillance and Control Program for nearly 4 years of collaboration as we've investigated the role of West Nile in the decline of ruffed grouse. Through this process, DEP's West Nile Surveillance and Control Program has been a steadfast collaborator. Program staff has guided us on research, trained us in disease surveillance, processed our samples, identified mosquito larvae and adults to species, which is no easy task, and conducted West Nile testing on suspect samples. And they've done this in addition to their already intense workload. Since 2015, this research has had a tremendous impact on the hunters of Pennsylvania and the scientific community. Our February 2017 webinar on the topic was the top viewed webinar in the history of our agency. Due to our solid research, vast majority of grouse hunters have supported us even as we've shortened the grouse season. Beyond Pennsylvania, multiple peer-reviewed articles have been published in scientific journals. These articles are informing the wildlife disease professionals and grouse population managers across the country about the impacts of West Nile virus on grouse. As we led the way with our research, the Game Commission continues to lead the way with developing tools to help mitigate disease impacts on grouse. Without our DEP's collaborators, all of this information would have remained unknown. We'd still only understand half the story behind the grouse declines, and we wouldn't fully understand the steps required to protect our state bird. So with that, I'd like to thank the DEP Secretary, Patrick McDonald, and Kyle, head of the West Nile Virus Program, and his staff, Matt Helwig, Bryn Whitmere, and Keith Price, and we'd like for them to come down and receive a symbol of our appreciation for their efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for the
Absolutely. Come on in, guys.
Come on. Yeah. You guys did all the work.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Megan Thorpe, if you would, please.
Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Thank you all for coming here today. I'm Megan Thorpe. I'm the Hunter Education Administrator with the Research and Education Division. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today to recognize our hunter education instructors who've dedicated 50, 55, and 60 years of service, and we're also going to recognize our statewide Instructor of the Year. A lot of you might not be aware, but 2019 marks 2 anniversaries for hunter education. So the first one is our 60th anniversary. In 1959, hunter education became a voluntary thing, but it was a course that was expanded across the state at that time. And then about 10 years later, in 1969, which would be our 50th anniversary, mandatory education was instituted for all first-time hunters under the age of 16. Now, all of the instructors that we have here today, they've all been volunteer hunter education instructors since those beginning years. They've worked diligently to make the program what it is now. So at this point, I could tell you guys how our instructors contribute to the continuation of Pennsylvania's hunting heritage, or I could tell you anecdotal stories I've heard from our students who have had great experience with these instructors and how they've impacted their lives as hunters and trappers in the woods. And actually, like any hunter worth her salt, I could probably tell you story after story after story from our students. Instead, I want everyone joining us across the Commonwealth to know that our instructors are not just hunters and trappers. They're not just volunteers. They're not just educators or storytellers. Our hunter education instructors are lifesavers. In the 60 years since this program began, approximately 18,884 hunting-related shooting incidents that would have happened have been prevented. And that has led to the prevention of 755 deaths. Now, to put this into perspective, that's about 12 people every hunting season since 1959. And they're here because of hunter education instructors and those who volunteer to teach the courses. So we're here to recognize you guys today, and we want you and your families to know that you should be proud of your hard work and efforts to ensure hunters and trappers remain safe while pursuing the activities they love so much. You guys save lives, literally. So on behalf of myself and the Pennsylvania Game Commission and hunters and trappers across the Commonwealth, I want to thank you for everything you do as hunter education instructors. So thank you very much. So first, we're going to recognize our 50-year service award winners. When I call your name, you can come up to the front, and we're going to present you with a commemorative knife. It's a limited edition from the Game Commission, our Game Bird series. And then we're going to also take photos, so if you want to get your knife or take a picture, and then you can return your seat, we'll do a group picture out in the lobby. Okay. So first up, we have William Chessman. Next is Ralph Muir. Larry Grothy. Thank you, sir. Very much.
Thanks for all your work.
Dale Ott.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
James McKenna. And we also had a couple other 50-year service award recipients who were not able to attend, and those are William Bauer, Randall Hagg, Thomas Schutz, Leroy Vatter, David Malone, and Roger Klingborg. Also, who was Charles Barnett Jr., he was supposed to join us. Unfortunately, he passed away last week. So his family wasn't able to make it either, and I just wanted to recognize him for his service. So we're going to go ahead and recognize the 55-year service recipients, and that would be Alan Zimmerman. William Carter. And William Macarith. I also want to mention our 60-year service award winners. Unfortunately, they were not able to join us because of distance. Glenn Clark, Randolph Bagolia, George Parcell. Thank you, gentlemen, for your dedication and your service. And I have one final recognition today. He was not able to join us. However, I believe he is watching today. So each year we ask our state game wardens to nominate someone from their district for their local Outstanding Instructor of the Year award. And from those nominees, we choose regional instructors of the year. The regions choose those. And from the regional instructors, we choose a statewide instructor of the year. So this year, Mr. Robert J. Dietz was chosen to receive statewide instructor of the year. He has been an instructor for 48 years, and he spent time serving the commission as a deputy warden as well. He helped introduce several thousand students to the tradition of hunting in Pennsylvania, and it's because of his continued dedication and passion to the program that he's being recognized here today. Again, he was not able to attend, but I wanted to ask you to join me in congratulating him in spirit. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you for having me, and especially thank you to our Hunter Education instructors, because you guys do save lives. Thank you.
Mark Duda. Mark Duda there.
Good morning. Mark, so here's your clicker then for your PowerPoint. All right, good morning, commissioners. It's my pleasure to introduce Mark Damian Duda. Mark is the executive director of Responsive Management, a survey research firm that specializes in natural resource and outdoor recreation issues. During the past 30 years, he's conducted more than 1,000 studies on how people relate to the natural world. About half of them were with the Game Commission, right? It seems that way because Mark is definitely no stranger to us. We've worked with him many times in the past. Mark is a certified wildlife biologist and the author of more than 150 articles and publications and 4 books on wildlife and outdoor recreation. Mark holds a master's degree from Yale with a specialization in natural resource and policy and planning. Today, Mark's going to be presenting a communications plan that Responsive Management prepared for the Commission. This plan is the synthesis of the results of previous surveys, a literature review, focus groups, and a survey of the general population of Pennsylvania adult residents. The plan is going to guide our communication efforts moving forward and will be incorporated into our strategic plan. So without any further ado, Mark, thank you.
So this works, or I could go by this. Good morning. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me on early. I was supposed to be on at 11, so much appreciated. As Steve said, I'm going to talk to for about 20 minutes on research that we did on how to better communicate with the public. So first I want to thank Corin for helping out, Corin Jagnow, Megan, Tyler, and Steve. Put a lot of effort into helping us design the studies, understanding the research. And so I always like to begin with sort of somebody here. Anybody recognize who that is? You've seen some of my presentations before. You know who that is. He's actually the reason that you're here, that you're a commissioner. He wrote a book called Game Management and another book that I know you're familiar with, which is Sand County Almanac. This is Aldo Leopold, considered the father of wildlife management. And Leopold was a biologist in a lot of ways. I mean, he wrote the first book on wildlife management. But yet, in the 1940s, before his death, he wrote that the problem of wildlife management is not how we should handle the deer. The real problem is one of human management. Wildlife management is comparatively easy. Human management is difficult. Pretty profound coming from the founder of game management. And if you think about how we are in terms of what we do, I like to show this slide because it shows us in the middle there as wildlife professionals, but we really deal with 3 different aspects of wildlife management. We deal with wildlife populations, we deal with habitats, and we deal with people. But what's so interesting in my 35-year career as a wildlife biologist, as a social scientist, is we treat those wildlife populations and those habitats as so scientific. Before we do anything, we study them, we put the money into it, and that's the way it should be. But when it comes to that third aspect of wildlife management, human populations, sometimes we just kind of take it for granted. Oh, they said this, or I think this. And we don't take that as scientifically as I think we should. But over the past decade to 15, 20 years, agencies have been taking that more seriously. And that's what we've been doing over 30 years, studying how people relate to wildlife. And over those 30 years, I've had the same job for 30 years. Same wife for 35 years, same kids too for 28 and 24. But over those 35 years, we've done work for every single state agency and a lot of other people, products that you use, organizations like the Turkey Federation, NSSF, NRA, organizations that many of you probably belong to. We also do a lot of work for nations' universities. Sometimes it looks like the top 25 in football or basketball. And so over the years, you can't read this, we've done 20 major projects for the Pennsylvania Game Commission as well as Fish and Boat Commission. Most recently, a big game survey on Pennsylvania residents' knowledge and attitudes toward big game. We did a number of studies that I don't really have time to, but we did a hunter access study. So if you want to know about how Pennsylvania residents relate to game and habitat, we've probably done work on it. So the point of this study is really to, again, better understand what Pennsylvania residents think and feel and know about wildlife, about game management, and about the Pennsylvania Game Commission. Do they know about the Game Commission? Are they getting enough information on wildlife-related issues? And so we did this in really 3 ways. Like Steve said, there's a lot of work that's been done previously. In fact, we located about 41 different studies that have been done on Pennsylvania residents or hunters wildlife watchers and their attitudes toward wildlife, specifically in Pennsylvania. So we looked at that. We started out with that literature review. We conducted a scientific survey of Pennsylvania residents to ask them about these issues. And then we finally brought that information to Pennsylvania residents in a series of focus groups in both urban as well as rural areas. These are sort of the demographic breakdowns of the state that we did. That's pretty small. You probably can't see that. Next time I'll make them much bigger. But for this study, we used Game Commission regions. But for the wildlife value study that we did, have you all seen the value study yet that we worked with Colorado State University? I don't know if that's been presented. It literally just was completed this past year. And then for the new study that we did that you will be seeing on attitudes toward game populations, we used your WMUs. So we can slice and dice this information in a number of different ways. And so I'm going to talk to you about a number of things, about 9 different things. The public's awareness of the commission, what they think of the name, the Game Commission, their awareness about funding. They know where you get your money from. The work that you do, the relevance that they have, that you have to them and that they have to you, what they think of you in terms of do they think you're credible or not. You're going to hear some good news on that. Their participation in wildlife-related recreation, and their opinions on hunting. So let's take these sort of one at a time, and I'm just going to sort of talk about the top level findings. So there's a lot more to this, a couple hundred pages. But this is sort of the top level of awareness. In some ways, about 25 to 30% of people are not aware of the commission when you talk to them. This is across the state. Obviously, that varies. About 6% of residents confuse the commission with the Gaming Control Board. That's not unusual. You know that I started my career with at the time, the Florida Game and Fish Commission. They're now the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, but we used to get calls a lot on that. So those who are very likely and very familiar to be with the commission tended to be probably a lot of similar folks in here. More rural, more male, more white, older, being a hunter, and not using social media, rarely or never. And those who are not familiar with the commission, we'll talk about this in 2 different ways, are residents of the Philadelphia metro area, more likely to be female, non-white, younger, and non-hunters. The good news is the people who aren't as familiar with the agency are more likely to use social media. And so hope you can see that. That's pretty good. So I'm going to present this a couple of different ways. The first is in an open-ended manner where we said, well, which governmental agency do you say is most responsible for managing wildlife in Pennsylvania? Upwards of 52% just didn't even want to name an agency, so I just don't know. About 28% got it right, and then about 10% sort of had this sort of essentially correct derivative of the Game Commission. Some people said the Boat Commission. I'm not sure why that they would say that, but they did. Some incorrect derivatives of the Fish and Boat Commission and other. So you can see sort of that split in terms of people being able to know specifically the name of the agency most responsible. So then you can ask these questions a number of different ways and get at it in a number of different ways. But then we asked, well, have you heard of the Pennsylvania Game Commission? And if they had, how familiar are they? And so about 27% very familiar, somewhat familiar, about 41%. And then sort of down the line to about 6% who thought they were the Game Commission or gambling casinos, and then 11% saying they weren't familiar at all. So a pretty big range. But the interesting thing is when you do that, and when you slice this through what we call cross-tabulations, it really varies across the board. And so this is that very top group where it's those people who said they were very familiar. Remember, there was a range, very, somewhat. So about 70% of hunters said they were very familiar, and then on down the line, living in rural areas, being male, living in the remainder of the state that's either not Philly or Pittsburgh. We broke those urban areas out. and then on down the line that way. So really vast differences when it comes to people just knowing or very familiar with the commission. And then this is the opposite end of that. These are the people who said they're not familiar at all with the commission. Non-white, living in Philadelphia, living in any large urban area or city, living in a suburban area, female. So you can see there's pretty great differences. And that's the important point about this project, is we not only wanted to know what people thought about the commission and what their awareness was, but who was thinking what. And if you know that, you can target these individuals better. So what do they think of the name of the commission? A number of things. The people who mixed up the game commission with the gaming board were more likely to be suburban, urban, those people that traditionally haven't been constituents. And we've worked with a number of agencies over the years that are game commissions, should they change their name to wildlife. Florida did that a few years ago, and others have not. So we're not, in this report, we're not really saying, oh, you should change your name or recommending it or anything like that. That's a pretty major deal. But we want you to be aware that there's people who are mixing up the game commission with the gaming board. There are people, when they look under wildlife, that can't find you and find that information, and some other issues related to that. So, and as well, you're in that unique position where you've got a separate game and then fish and boat commission. But there are some issues surrounding the name other than just knowing who they are. So do they know where you get your money from? Well, the answer is not really. A lot of people think that you get your money from taxes and just general tax revenue. And that's obviously not a good thing, because you're funded so much by hunting and trapping licenses and dollars. And so definitely there needs to be some kind of communications in terms of publicizing the fact that you're not getting general revenue taxes, and the importance of hunting and shooting equipment. The good news on that is that if you so choose, that a majority of Pennsylvania residents support the idea of going for some type of alternative funding. And we've worked with every single state fish and wildlife agency out there. I've presented to literally, I think, 48 of the commissions or boards or directors. And agencies are grappling with that across the nation of funding. Some states are having some pretty severe hunting license declines and other things. And I'll show you the numbers on that. And so this is that one where we asked the question, how do you think the Pennsylvania Game Commission is funded? And we've got all of these taxes, specifically, just taxes. People just aren't aware of these things. Hunting licenses, only about a third, 32% said hunting licenses. Trapping licenses at 17%. And then if you look down, we've worked with this issue for upwards of 20 years or so, is look at over almost at the bottom, the excise taxes on hunting and shooting equipment. I mean, 2%. I mean, just literally an unknown. That's brought in so much, upwards of billions of dollars since its inception in 1937, and yet people don't know who they are. So, but then you're going to ask me, well, Mark, how about hunters? We shouldn't just ask the general population that. And so the green are hunters. You can see that even amongst hunters, you see high levels of tax answers. That increases to about 66%, two-thirds saying hunting licenses. This is an open-ended question. And then general state revenue and on down the line. But even among hunters, again, this is just a general question. We didn't provide answers, so I'm sure if you ask hunters, are there excise taxes, more are going to know. But in terms of that top of the mind, it's just, you can see that it's just not there. So what I would characterize as quite low levels of knowledge about agency funding. So in terms of very good news here, if you ask the residents of Pennsylvania, 18 years old and older, would you agree or disagree that elected officials in Pennsylvania should explore options for new funding sources to help pay for the management of Pennsylvania's wild birds, mammals, and their habitats? Almost 3/4 support that. Hunters supported that as well, but slightly lower levels, within 4 or 5%. So are they aware of your work? Well, sort of and sort of not. And there's a couple ways to look at this in terms of the importance that people place on the various topics and areas that you work in, as well as the relevance to them as an individual. And so conserving and protecting wildlife and habitat and enforcing laws were by far the most important things that you do to the public. Only about 10% in this open-ended manner knew the commission provides hunting opportunities. 8% knowing the commission makes hunters safer. Again, good news here. You know, you're seeing some things on low levels of awareness, low levels of knowledge. But what it's crystal clear in this is that the people who know you, tabulations of the people who are most aware of you, think the highest of you. They give you the highest ratings. They give you the highest levels of credibility. And that's a good thing, right? I mean, think if it were the opposite. The more they knew you, the more they didn't like you. Well, that's not true. The more that they know about the Pennsylvania Game Commission, the more credibility ratings go up, the more levels of satisfaction go up. So let's take a look at some of these numbers. Again, this is a great number here. We're sort of getting into that season of politicians and presidential races, gubernatorial races. Any politician in the U.S. would kill for these numbers right here. Look at these numbers, 68% satisfied, 6% dissatisfied. I don't know if this works here. Does this? I don't think I'm going to be able to reach it. But down there on the 3% very dissatisfied, truth is a lot of those people have you on speed dial. Those are the people who call you all the time. And so that's the importance of these types of scientific surveys, is to put that in perspective. Again, I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds because that's just a fantastic number. Again, we do these for all the agencies, and those numbers are great. You're never going to do, I don't think you're ever going to do anything with those 3% that are very dissatisfied. You give them, you know, free 900-pound bears and, you know, whatever, and they're still going to be mad. I don't know. So great numbers on that, and you should feel good. And there's going to be another one on credibility that's also very, very good. In terms of those who are satisfied or dissatisfied, we did this regionally. We did it in the Philly area, what we call the remainder of the state. It's not very fair to the remainder of the state, and Pittsburgh, but we were looking at those urban-rural differences because so much of what's coming out on how people relate to wildlife now are showing those major differences between urban areas and the rest of the state. But you can see that even in the urban areas in Philadelphia, that blue one there, your ratings went down a little bit in terms of satisfaction, but it wasn't because people were dissatisfied, it was because they just didn't know. And again, that's a major theme throughout the study. How about relevance in terms of what we do with the commission to the publics out there? A number of findings. People felt very comfortable in terms of the importance of what you're doing, but we found a lot of people who said, well, it just isn't directly relate to me, that it's not as relevant as it should be. So the point, sort of the major finding here that we wrote is that Pennsylvania residents already think the work of the commission is important. Now it has to be shown to be relevant to them. Those who felt the work affects them the most, rural residents, white, younger, and hunters, and sort of the mirror image of that in terms of those who felt the commission's work did not affect them, urban, suburban, again, a common theme, non-white, and non-hunters. And so this, again, is one of those cross tabulations. It sounds like they printed that out for you. I apologize that this is small. Next time I come, I'll make these a lot bigger. But at the top of the list, this is the people who said, these are the following groups, who said the work of the commission does not affect them. And again, you can see the themes here. Living in a large city or urban area, lives in Philadelphia metro, non-white, non-hunter, lives in suburban areas, female. So very major differences across the board. How about in terms of support and ratings of the commission, in terms of what you do? And we asked this in two ways. We asked how important various areas of wildlife management that you get into, versus how important it is, versus how good a job you're doing. And that's important as well. And so the overall ratings were really positive. And again, what you focus on is showing in terms of public perceptions. People feel comfortable with that. The other recommendation and sort of the observation is that those ecological values in terms of habitat management and those types of things are more important than the recreational values. And that's a fundamental, we've seen that over the years across the U.S., that ecological values are more important than recreational values. We're not saying that recreational values aren't important, but those ecological values sort of trump the recreational values. Enforcing game laws was very important to Pennsylvania residents. And one of the more interesting things when we talk about relevance is that among a lot of the stuff that you've done protecting residents from diseases was quite important to urban residents, especially Lyme disease. Much more important for whatever reason amongst urban areas from a human safety perspective. And so you can't see this again. I apologize. I didn't know the screen was this small. But at the top of the list, we have things like protecting and preserving wildlife habitat, protecting endangered species, enforcing game laws. And so what we have in this report for you are all of those things that people think are important, as well as the ratings of how good of a job you're doing. And you can see that literally all of those things are important, but some things are more important than others. Again, things like ecological values, those protecting and preserving wildlife habitat, protecting endangered species, those ecological values. Not saying that recreational values, such as providing opportunities for trapping, providing opportunities for recreational hunting aren't important, but they're just not as important as those ecological values. So in terms of information, where people get their information from, it's going to talk a little bit about this. The commission is perceived as a very widely credible source of information. Again, when people know you, when they're familiar with what it is that you do, they feel very comfortable with it. And you're going to really like these levels of credibility. And a number of people really look for information. About 13% of Pennsylvania residents look to the commission's website for information. That's not an insubstantial number of people in a state that has, almost 10 million people here, right? It's like 9.8 million or something. That's a lot of people. About a quarter of Pennsylvania residents have seen a great deal from you, so we are reaching pockets of individuals. And then YouTube and Facebook are the top ways people would likely to engage with the commission. Again, we have a lot of real specific information here that Steve's group will take a look at and be able to target these groups, because we're able to know who thinks what and how to get to them. I can't do that here in a 20-minute presentation, but you now have that information. Great number. We would be glad to post this or print this out for you and give you a framed copy of it, put above your desk, because, again, these are great numbers. And look at these. I mean, any politician in the world, any business or corporation in the world would kill for these numbers, gentlemen. Look at that. 61% saying that you're very credible in terms of the information that you provide. That's darn good. 26% somewhat credible. There's that 2% again, not at all credible. You probably know some of those people, don't you? Yeah, and again, that 11% who don't know. In terms of where they're getting their information, where they're looking for it, you can see the internet has just become so important. In my career of 35 years, I mean, we've just seen it differ, haven't we? When we first started out, it was newsletters and brochures and slideshows. You guys probably don't remember the slideshows. And if this was 25 years ago, I'd be doing overheads for you. So we've come a ways. But you can see how incredibly important the internet is. People want more information. People want more information from the commission. I see this in every single state fish and wildlife agency that we do work for. People want to hear more from you. Upwards of 33% say we want more information. We disagree that we're getting the information, the amount of information that we want. This is sort of one of the last slides, but I wanted to show it to you because I wanted to show you how in-depth we went in this communications plan in this study. We now know who thinks what of the commission, we know where they live, we know their attitudes and their values, and we know how to get to them in terms of their preferred communications mechanisms. On this, 19% said they would be very likely to watch YouTubes on the commission, 2% more. Last week I was able to present, we finished a fairly major project for the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, and they just can't produce enough YouTube videos for the demand out there in terms of fishing. So YouTube on fishing, on hunting, on trapping are widely used. And if you look at those, it always is just stunning, 8 million views. You just wonder, it's like people just sit around and watch these things all the time. But a great way to get to people. People following the commission on Facebook, listening to podcasts, following the commission on Instagram, and then Twitter, not as much, you can see. So we, again, know this. And we also know who does it. Again, this is just of Pennsylvania residents as a whole, but we're giving you regions by gender, by age, across the board. Finally, a couple of last things, participation in wildlife-related recreation. You know these numbers in terms of the percent who are going hunting, people who are taking trips to view wildlife. Unfortunately, with the national survey this year, every 5 years since 1955, Fish and Wildlife Service has done the National Survey of Fishing, Hunting, and Wildlife Associated Recreation. 2011, you had state-level data, but we don't have state-level data in 2016. It doesn't look like we're going to have it for the next one, which is slated for 2022. But the point here that I really wanted to make is that while a lot of people are hunting, what do you have, like almost 1 million hunting license sales, if I remember, around there? It's a lot of people, and a lot of states would kill for that. But when you start looking at people who go away from their homes for the primary purpose of viewing wildlife, or even those people who are doing it around the home, you have millions and millions of more people. And again, it's another way to bring what the commission does to these people. Finally, I'm just going to present one very quick graph, but if you're interested in what Americans, and we also could do this on a Pennsylvania-wide basis, on what people think of hunting, trapping. We just completed a fairly major study for the Fish and Wildlife Service on those issues. And it's not complicated, but it's more complex than just saying, well, do you support or oppose hunting? And the way that we ask it is, do you support or oppose? And we can show you here. We ask just percent of approval or disapproval of hunting among Pennsylvania residents. But we'll say, do you support or oppose legal regulated hunting? Because people confuse poaching with hunting. You'd be amazed how many people still do that. But attitudes toward hunting can depend on a number of things, not just legal regulated hunting, but on hunting motivations. You'll get really high levels of support for hunting for meat, but trophy hunting is within 20% and everywhere in between. On a species by species basis, hunting for deer, way up there. Hunting for some of the larger carnivores, lower down. And when was the last time, PETA or HSUS came and said, we're going to stop trophy hunting we're going to stop meat hunting for deer? You don't hear that. What you do hear is, we're going to stop trophy hunting for bear or mountain lion. And so that can really vary, but we have information on that. The good news is we do this in every single state. Support for hunting among Pennsylvania residents for hunting is as high as anywhere in the U.S. So you're relatively safe, although you're never safe. We do a lot of work in Maine for the Maine Department of Wildlife and Inland Fisheries, and there's a big bear controversy right now there. That's been taken to ballot initiative. So I tried to talk as absolutely fast as I could. I only hit the surface on this because we have a lot more information. I left out the new study that we did with Colorado State University on Americans' wildlife values. You all were involved with that. In fact, you paid for an upper level of that study to get even more information. There's a wealth of information there. But in 20 minutes, I can only give you sort of the top of what it is that we found. So I want to say a couple things. First, thanks for letting me do work for you guys for the past 25 years or so. Hopefully I can do it for another 25. It's really appreciated. The second thing is you've got such an incredible amount of information out here on how people relate to wildlife. The bottom line here is that the things that you're doing and the things that you've done for the past 50, 60, 70 years, since you were conceived, you're doing really well. And people know that. But there's a chunk of people, especially in Philly, and sometimes when you're thinking about how to characterize some of these studies, you want to say sort of cute things that people remember, and you guys have heard sort of, Houston, we have a problem. In this case, it might be Philly, we have a problem. People in Philadelphia don't know who we are and what we do. What we do, there's some things that are really important to them. They just don't know about us. We don't have as much of a presence there. So to characterize and to summarize, we're doing a great job at what we do. The question now is, with America's changing, I do a lot of studies on changing demographics and such. America's changing, it's changing fast. We're urbanizing, we're getting older. Think about this statistic, and it's a ways away, but in 2050, there are going to be more people over 65 than under 18. It's a world turned upside down. That's not a world that we're used to. But this is the world that Fish and Wildlife agencies are coming into. So again, I can take questions or I'm at your service. But great job in terms of what we're doing. There's definitely groups out there in Pennsylvania that don't know who we are, but are certainly receptive to our message. So, and where I began, because I began with Leopold. The problem of wildlife management is not how we should handle the deer. The real problem is one of human management. Wildlife management is comparatively easy. Human management is difficult. You just don't listen sometimes. Thank you.
Mark, we appreciate that presentation, yeah. It's encouraging to see the numbers that you brought up, because we always sit around and talk about how great we are, but we just don't think that people know it. But it's encouraging. It really is encouraging to see the numbers that you brought forward, and knowing that Brian has made some moves as far as staffing, so that we were going to do a better job of getting the word out to those people that don't know.
Yep.
And it's funny that you say it, because we talk about the Philadelphia area all the time, and the struggles that we have down there in deer management specifically, and they don't know what we're doing down there, and they need to know what we're doing down there, and you bring those issues to light, and I certainly appreciate that.
Yeah,
So
thank
you. Anybody else have any questions, any comments?
I appreciate it seeing the 2% that strongly disagree.
Oh.
We certainly hear from them all the time.
Brian and I wrote their names down, so if you want to know who they are.
You do hear from those people. I was asked to do the keynote opening speech for the Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies this year. And I went through a number of our studies and such, but one of the sections I couldn't think of a better name for. So the title of this one section was How State Fish and Wildlife Agencies Get Jerked Around by the Public and What We Can Do About It. And so we're in the process of writing a paper of all those ways that you've got your mission, and yet you have a few people that can game the system, if you will. And it's hard for agencies when you're not doing scientific studies to get a larger handle on what people think and feel and know about you. So yeah. So we do confidential surveys, so I can't tell you who those people are, but I figured you already knew who they were, because you probably heard from them this past month.
No doubt, no doubt.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
We turn it over to you. We're going to start with Emily. Does he know that? Rich, we want to start with Emily Rinaldi.
With who?
With Penn Future.
Okay.
All
right. Next up, we have Penn Future's 5th Annual Celebrating Women in Conservation Award, presented by Penn Future, to Lauren Ferrari. Folks, want to come down? Tim, Brian? You guys coming down for a photo? Up to you, Joe. You want to speak?
Yes, please.
Sure. I didn't see your notes. Oh, look at the things you got there.
Good morning. My name is Gwen Miller. It's my pleasure to be here today representing Penn Future, Pennsylvania's watchdog for clean air, pure water, and a healthy climate. On behalf of Penn Future's board and staff, I am proud to honor Lauren Ferrari with the Women of Environmental Education Award as part of Penn Future's 5th Annual Celebrating Women in Conservation Awards, which was held on April 25th. Lauren wasn't able to attend, so we are honoring her here today. The Women of Environmental Education Award honors an individual who dedicates herself to educating her central Pennsylvania community and the public about sustainability, environmental awareness, and environmental policy. Lauren became the manager of the Middle Creek Wildlife Management Area in 2016. She is focused on enhancing the educational experience provided to tourists and visitors of Middle Creek. Lauren increased the informational value of hiking trails by designing trails that give information about the wildlife living in the area and the habitats they need to thrive. Because of her efforts, visitors now have the opportunity to access information digitally and through the airwaves. She oversaw the installation of a camera to live stream the snow goose and swan migration, and she created radio access to audio files to accompany wildlife driving tours. Originally from Mooresville, Pennsylvania, Ferrari now lives in Newmanstown in Lebanon County. Congratulations, Lauren. Okay.
Normally, one of the awards that we would present at this meeting is our 25-year employee award. We're fortunate to have pretty good retention in the Game Commission, and we have a lot of long-term employees. Unfortunately, none of the 25-year employees could make it to this meeting this year, from what I understand. So we're going to move on to the retirement recognition of Southwest Deputy Game Wardens Jay Burns and Jesse Sims, presented by their supervising game wardens.
Come on up, Bill and Chris. I want to thank President Layton and his recently had two of our long-serving deputy game wardens retire, and one of which, Jay Burns, sitting in the back here, has served the Commonwealth for 45 years. The other one right here in front of me, Jesse Sims, served the Commonwealth and the Game Commission for 32 years. I've known both these guys my entire career, so this is personal to me. Worked with both of them, Jesse directly, Jay indirectly in Westmoreland County my entire career, and can't say enough about the quality of these two people. I'm going to let their supervising officers actually present the awards, but I just wanted to say that 45 years, Jay, my God, the most senior officer in our region, and I'm not going to get into any details, but he was hitting it hard right up to the end. Jesse, same thing, 32 years, hitting it hard right up to the end. Jesse made me look good every day in my district. He was out there. If Jesse went out to work, he enforced the law, and he did a good job. Jay, when he was working full time for DCNR Bureau of Parks, while being a deputy, he was in Keystone State Park, and I had a hunting-related shooting incident that happened there in turkey season, and I arrived, and I had zero to do. Jay was there. Jay had the entire thing wrapped up, already had Mirandized the offender, had all the evidence, so I appreciated that, Jay. Yeah, outstanding individuals. respected by every officer and employee in the region. And the last thing I wanted to say before I turn it over to these guys and bring these guys up is Candy and Vera, thank you. Because these guys don't do it without the support at home. And Jay brought his family. Thank you guys, because that's a lot of time. You're missing so much family activity. I know your boys are busy. They couldn't be here today, but this is a family commitment. So thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, boys. Bill Brand from Westmoreland County, and Jesse and Jay, come on up. And Chris Reed Miller from Indiana County. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I first off want to thank everyone for coming out today. This is a very special moment for these gentlemen here. It's a tough moment. You know, for 45 years for Jay and 32 years for Jesse, this is something that they love to do. They work their normal jobs, they have their family obligations, and on top of that, they're here not only to help myself as a district warden, the wardens before me, but they're there to help the men and women who make up our sporting ranks out there and to help the citizens who live within our districts. I can't say enough about Jesse. I've been in that district for 3.5 years now. You know, he was on as a deputy game warden for long before I came, but the stories that I hear, the people that I talk to, the lives that he's helped, touched, not only as a deputy, but as a hunter education instructor as well. Jesse, thank you so very much for your years of service and what you've done for the citizens of the Commonwealth. Thank you. What we have here is a certification or a certificate of his retirement for long-standing and retirement of 32 years of service, along with the retirement from District 2653. He was appointed in 1987 and retired in 2019 with 32 years of service. The most important part, the retirement credentials.
Thank you, Jesse.
So I get the honor of presenting Jay with his retirement stuff. And me and Bill were classmates. We graduated from the 29th class, 2013. And so I've been in Indiana County the entire time. So when I came to the district, Jay only had 38 years on. He was still a newbie. But I was smart enough as a brand new warden to let Jay take the lead on pretty much everything my first several years, up until pretty much the time he retired. And when Tom said that Jay was active till his last days as a warden, he was my go-to guy. He was my partner. He was my right-hand man. He was the guy I could call at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday because he's retired, and his family knows Jay loves this stuff. So how many wardens did you train in your career?
Didn't count.
So he was, we always joked he was my deputy, but he was training me. So he went through a lot of district wardens. In these months that he's been retired, it hasn't been the same for me. So I lost my partner, but you know, I'm glad he's getting to spend some time with the family and do other things. I might still borrow him from time to time, but you know, Jay was the kind of guy, you know, he was at the top of, we'd walk up a mountain. Indiana County's pretty hilly. We'd walk up to the top of a mountain, and Jay would be there before me, and he wouldn't even be breathing hard. And you know, Jay came on in 1973, and I wasn't born for the next 12 years. So, you know, he, you know, kept him active, and I appreciate all you did for me, and I appreciate all you did for the Commonwealth, Jay.
All right, thanks.
Next on the agenda is a presentation to the Department of Environmental Protection. That's done? Okay, that's it.
This will end our public session for today, and we will reconvene tomorrow at 8:30. Thank you all for attending.